Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
She said that if there was a time when you were getting, would reimagine it in a way that you were actually able to leave the room.
You were in the courtroom. I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the week.
When forgotten love notes resurface and collide with 4 intense days of chilling courtroom testimony, the atmosphere turns electric. Cassie's harrowing allegations, detailing wild sex parties and a violent assault, have sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The revelations are unraveling fast, and Diddy is visibly cracking under the pressure.
Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, is set to retake the stand and face what we expect to be her final round of questioning under cross-examination. Court currently is on a short lunch break, but if you recall, the judge previously said that he wanted Ventura's cross-examination to wrap up before lunch today. Prosecutors have said that Ventura, who's nearly 9 months pregnant, could soon go into labor.
Over the last hour, the defense has been asking Ventura more about her 2018 rape allegation against Combs, Ventura's drug use, her mental also raised in court. The defense at one point asking Ventura, quote, "Do you still have love for him?" referring to Combs. And Ventura answered by saying, quote, "I have love for the past and what it was."
Cassie's testimony didn't just rattle the courtroom, it shattered any illusion of normalcy surrounding her relationship with Diddy. The Mamir Tio. Air grew thick with disbelief as even the most hardened courtroom veterans were left speechless. This wasn't a typical tale of celebrity romance gone sour. What Cassie described was something far more sinister, something veiled behind the balm, glitz of fame and wealth. At the heart of her allegations were what she chillingly referred to as freak-off parties, exclusive, secretive gatherings that, according to her, were anything but consensual celebrations. These weren't your standard high society soirees with A-listers and velvet ropes. Cassie painted a starkly different picture: private, orchestrated events designed by Diddy himself, where women were allegedly manipulated or pressured into sexual acts for the amusement of him and his elite circle. She testified that she was coerced into attending early in their relationship, quickly learning that resistance wasn't tolerated. Saying no wasn't just difficult, it was seemingly not an option. She spoke of being stripped of agency, describing a dynamic in which Diddy controlled her appearance, behavior, and even her interactions at these parties. It wasn't simply about showing up. It was about performing a role, a part in a disturbing power play she claimed was impossible to escape. Her words painted a grim picture of psychological manipulation and emotional imprisonment behind closed doors. To the outside world, their relationship had glimmered with fame and affluence, a picture-perfect union of music royalty. But in court, Cassie revealed what she described as the disturbing reality beneath the polished surface: a relationship marked by fear, control, and submission. She alleged that the manipulation began almost immediately after they became involved, setting the tone for years of domination disguised as love. Her account of the freak-off parties was particularly harrowing. Cassie testified that these weren't spontaneous gatherings, but calculated productions with clear expectations. The guest list? Carefully curated, high-powered men with status and influence. The women? Supposedly expected to comply with the unspoken rules: obey, perform, don't question. She explained that participation was framed as a condition of staying in the relationship, a twisted transaction of intimacy for approval. The reaction in the courtroom was immediate and visceral. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Cassie shared the degradation she said she endured. Her voice, though composed, carried the weight of deep trauma as she described how the illusion of choice vanished the moment she stepped into those rooms. According to her, these weren't mere parties. They were stages set for control, where consent was a performance, not a reality. For the prosecution, her revelations were a crucial moment in their case. They argued that these events weren't isolated incidents but part of a systemic pattern of abuse and control. By lifting the veil on what happened behind those locked doors, they aimed to expose how power and influence were allegedly wielded to silence and subjugate. And just when it seemed Cassie's account couldn't grow darker, she dropped a revelation that turned the entire courtroom cold. She claimed that at one of these events, Diddy demanded she perform sexual acts with others, while he watched. She described feeling objectified, trapped in a situation that stripped her of humanity. The words hung in the air, heavy with horror. For those listening, it was a defining moment. one that transformed Cassie's testimony from disturbing to devastating. Observers reported a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. Diddy, usually composed and confident, was visibly shaken. Spectators exchanged glances, some with wide eyes, others unable to meet each other's gaze as the reality of what was being alleged settled in. What Cassie shared wasn't simply about relationship toxicity. It was about deep systemic exploitation. Her testimony was more than storytelling. It was a cry for acknowledgement. And it didn't end with her words. The prosecution teased the existence of corroborating evidence, including surveillance footage from a 2016 incident that had yet to be fully revealed. That evidence, they hinted, could substantiate her claims and solidify the narrative of abuse and coercion. As Cassie stepped down, the silence in the courtroom spoke volumes. Her testimony had delivered a thunderous impact, and the anticipation for what came next was almost unbearable. This trial was no longer just about celebrity scandal. It was about power, consent, and the courage to confront darkness that had long been hidden.
Is right when they say that Cassie Ventura is the most critical witness to this case. The defense is doing its job because what they're trying to do is bring out that she's not a perfect person, that they're saying she might have wanted to engage in these freak-offs on more than one occasion, that she was willingly staying in this relationship with Sean Combs, even though she knew that it was an abusive one. They're bringing out things that she said to other people that are less than flattering. All that being said, the government doesn't need to have a perfect victim. What the government has done this week essentially is establishing the sex trafficking crimes that they've charged Sean Combs with. And I would argue that they are well on their way to proving these crimes. A lot of people don't realize that with value, not even necessarily money, to be given by force or coercion. And so Cassie Ventura has done her job this week for the government, and now the defense is doing its job to try to make it seem as if she wanted to be in this relationship and that what happened in those freak-offs was not coerced.
The courtroom froze as the prosecution queued up the surveillance footage, an unflinching visual tied to a 2016 incident that now forms the backbone of Cassie's case against Sean Diddy Combs. Until that moment, the trial had largely rested on Cassie's powerful words, harrowing, emotional, but still ultimately testimonial. This video changed everything. With its introduction, the case shifted from a matter of he said, she said, into one anchored by undeniable imagery. The effect was immediate. The atmosphere, already tense, thickened with gravity as the footage rolled behind closed courtroom doors. Described in detail by those present but sealed from public release, the video reportedly aligned seamlessly with Cassie's narrative. Her voice had already walked jurors through the terror she felt during that 2016 night, cornered, verbally berated, and physically assaulted in a way that, according to her, revealed the darkest parts of Diddy's alleged temper. Now, the footage offered a chilling supplement, affirming the terror in real time. The prosecution used this moment to maximum effect. They didn't just present the video, they built a framework around it, reinforcing Cassie's timeline and positioning the footage as a critical piece of a broader story about long-term abuse. It wasn't just one incident, they argued. It was a snapshot of a consistent, toxic pattern. Cassie had already testified that this particular altercation left her emotionally devastated and physically shaken. Now, jurors could see for themselves that her pain wasn't imagined or exaggerated. From the jury box, reactions spoke volumes. Some jurors reportedly leaned forward, their eyes locked onto the screen. Others sat motionless, their expressions frozen. The room, once filled with murmurs and courtroom rustlings, had gone pin-drop silent. Reporters described the moment as surreal, like the courtroom had momentarily transformed into a theater of reckoning. The video's inclusion was a clear win for the prosecution. Until now, Diddy's defense team had worked hard to reframe the relationship as flawed but mutual. Volatile, yes, but marked by two willing participants. They argued that Cassie's claims were being distorted, her emotions heightened by hindsight. But the footage contradicted that defense, giving jurors a disturbing look into a reality that words alone could never quite capture. As the video concluded and lights brightened slightly in the courtroom, the defense scrambled to recalibrate. Their strategy pivoted almost instantly. Rather than attack the footage head-on, a nearly impossible feat, they leaned into technical skepticism. They argued that the video lacked context, that a single incident, no matter how intense, couldn't encapsulate the full scope of a complex relationship. They claimed it was misleading to reduce years together to one emotionally charged moment, but the prosecution had already made their point. This wasn't about a single bad night. It was about a pattern, a power imbalance, and a cycle of alleged manipulation and abuse. And now they had something tangible to show for it. In a surprising move, the defense introduced a new element into the mix: past affectionate messages Cassie had sent Diddy after their relationship ended. Screenshots and printed exchanges were presented, the implication clear. If the relationship had truly been abusive, how could these warm, even loving messages exist? It was a calculated gamble, an attempt to blur the emotional lines and cast doubt on Cassie's credibility. Legal analysts in attendance quickly noted the tactic's potential pitfalls. While some jurors might find the messages puzzling or even contradictory, others, particularly those familiar with the complex psychology of abusive relationships, might see it differently. Affection, guilt, denial, and trauma often coexist in such dynamics, and the defense risked appearing tone-deaf to that nuance. Despite their best efforts, the defense couldn't erase the lingering image of the 2016 footage. It had landed like a thunderclap, clear, visceral, and emotionally devastating. Cassie's words had moved many, but now her claims had visual reinforcement. The court had seen something that would be hard to forget. By the end of the prosecution's segment, the mood was palpably changed. Diddy sat noticeably more subdued, his legal team tight-lipped and measured. Tension crackled through the courtroom as everyone awaited the next strategic move. The trial had reached a turning point, and no one could deny it. With the introduction of the surveillance video, Cassie's case wasn't just compelling, it was now undeniably rooted in hard, disturbing evidence.
I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the week, especially the pictures and the texts that they got to see so far.
Well, I was in the overflow room today, but the consensus about the jury is that they've been pretty stoic. There was one juror who seemed to have a bit of a reaction when they were shown sealed photos. I believe it was about two. Again, overall, the consensus also in the overflow room is just that people are shocked at a lot of this testimony, a lot of the evidence that's coming in. And it's tough. We are seeing, I guess, just like this side of Cassie that, unfortunately she's had to disclose to all of us to help get a conviction for Sean Combs. And you really feel for her because she's remained so composed throughout, her cross-examination, her the redirects, and she's 8.5 months pregnant. And we didn't see her lose her temper or just get, angry at all or frustrated. And I find that to be pretty incredible.
The defense believed they'd found a silver bullet: affectionate text messages sent by Cassie to Diddy after their breakup. On paper, it looked like a calculated move, a way to inject doubt into the emotional weight of her harrowing testimony. These messages, they implied, stood in stark contradiction to the disturbing allegations Cassie had laid out in court. Could someone who claimed to be traumatized by years of control, coercion, and violence really be sending messages laced with warmth and familiarity? But once those messages were introduced into evidence, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted, not toward vindication for Diddy, but toward skepticism of the defense's strategy. What was pitched as a game-changing revelation quickly began to feel tone-deaf and miscalculated. The move that might have seemed smart in theory came off as grasping when laid against the deeply personal and disturbing experiences Cassie had already shared on the stand. So, what did these messages actually contain? Though most were kept sealed, those that were discussed reportedly carried a casual, even lighthearted tone, an exchange of pleasantries, occasional emojis, and a familiarity that didn't quite line up with the image of a shattered survivor. The defense clung to this as proof that Cassie's story didn't add up. If she feared him, they asked the jury, why was she still talking to him like everything was okay? The prosecution didn't blink. They immediately countered with context. the critical factor the defense, they argued, was purposefully ignoring. Trauma doesn't unfold on a schedule. Survivors, they reminded the courtroom, often maintain contact with their abusers for reasons far more complex than affection: fear, habit, psychological conditioning, or even just trying to maintain peace, while quietly planning an exit. Cassie herself addressed the messages head-on when she returned to the stand. There was no denial, no attempt to spin. She looked the jury in the eyes and explained what those texts really were: survival tactics. After years in a relationship where she claimed her autonomy had been systematically eroded, cordial communication felt like the safest way forward, even after things had ended. The friendly tone, she said, wasn't about love. It was about not provoking a man she feared. "I needed him to think I was okay," she reportedly said, "because if he thought I wasn't, I didn't know what he would do." That moment hit hard. Observers in the courtroom described a noticeable change, not just in how the jury responded, but in Diddy himself. Where he had once seemed composed, his demeanor faltered. He shifted in his seat, no longer the picture of quiet confidence. It wasn't just the content of Cassie's explanation. It was the clarity and strength with which she delivered it. The defense's strategy, once seen as potentially clever, now seemed to crumble under the weight of Cassie's testimony. Her response redefined the narrative. Those texts didn't undercut her story. They highlighted just how deep the psychological manipulation allegedly ran. And in doing so, she took control of the courtroom yet again. Outside the courthouse, the public reaction mirrored what was happening inside. While some questioned the idea of staying in touch with an abuser, many others, especially survivors of intimate partner violence, understood exactly what Cassie meant. They flooded social media with commentary about how complicated and messy abusive dynamics can be. "This is what survival looks like," one advocate wrote. "It's not always clean. It's not always a straight line." Legal experts chimed in, pointing out that the defense's reliance on these messages revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of trauma psychology. Instead of undermining Cassie's credibility, the texts, when placed in full context, showcased how abuse can linger in subtle, haunting ways, even after the doors have supposedly closed. By the time Cassie stepped down from the stand, the courtroom buzzed with a new energy. Not only had she addressed the defense's key argument, she had dismantled it. What they hoped would be a blow to her credibility became one of the most poignant illustrations of her reality. As the trial continued, the stakes only grew higher. Diddy, once confident in the shield of celebrity and controlled narratives, now faced a version of events that was deeply human, painfully honest, and increasingly difficult to refute. With the prosecution gaining momentum and Cassie's courage front and center, it was clear the defense's strategy hadn't just missed the mark, it had backfired.
When you hear all these things, and of course this is their side of the story, but when you hear these things, it's just like, dude, why was this man so possessive, so demonic, so just, I don't know, you got that much money, you're on the top of the world, and you really think that you're invincible. I mean, people can be rich and do a gang of positive things for people. I ain't saying he ain't never helped anybody out, but a lot of times when they do that, it's to mask all the craziness that they do. But I'm just saying, think about someone in his position just having that type of life. It's just when all the illegalness comes in, And I think that's what people are getting confused on. They think the domestic stuff and the other stuff don't go hand in hand. It does. And even though he's not being charged, but it goes hand in hand. And like I said, if you're on the jury, I don't know how you can look past that. It's the control factor. So he was using intimidation to get what he wants.
From the moment Cassie took the witness stand, the atmosphere inside the courtroom changed, thick with anticipation and unease. Yet it wasn't only her voice that commanded attention. All eyes shifted between her and Diddy, not just because of the gravity of her allegations, but because Diddy himself became part of the spectacle. His body language, once composed, rehearsed, and measured, began unraveling in real time. For someone known for exuding confidence and control, his inability to maintain composure under pressure spoke volumes. As Cassie detailed the darkest corners of their relationship, particularly the explosive revelations about being coerced into disturbing freak-off gatherings, Diddy's demeanor faltered. Her testimony wasn't vague or generalized. She provided specifics, timelines, and descriptions that cut deep. Observers noted that as her words painted a harrowing portrait of control and degradation, Diddy shifted restlessly in his chair, visibly unsettled. He no longer looked like a man in control of the room. He looked cornered. Multiple sources inside the courtroom described him reacting in real time. No longer quietly conferring with his legal team or jotting down notes, he began displaying discomfort. His expressions hardened, his jaw clenched, and his frustration became increasingly evident. When the prosecution introduced the surveillance, footage tied to the alleged 2016 assault, the impact intensified. As the video played, Diddy leaned back in his seat, let out a sharp exhale, and turned his gaze away from the monitor. It was a striking moment. Here was a man whose image had long been carefully curated, suddenly appearing small and shaken in front of the very jury that would decide his fate. Legal analysts watching the trial unfold noted how critical such visual cues can be. A composed, steady demeanor under pressure might communicate confidence, or even innocence. But someone visibly agitated while facing damning testimony, that can leave a mark. And as Cassie continued, unflinching in her delivery, Diddy's frustration only seemed to grow. Meanwhile, the energy in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. Cassie's descriptions of fear, degradation, and psychological manipulation gripped everyone present. The jurors, previously expressionless, showed signs of discomfort. Some fixed their gaze on her, visibly affected by her emotional clarity. Others kept glancing at Diddy, seemingly analyzing whether his reactions matched the man being described. The most telling moment came when Cassie recounted an alleged incident in which Diddy, in front of others, belittled and used his power to humiliate her. At that point, Diddy reportedly shook his head in disbelief and leaned over to whisper sharply to one of his attorneys. No microphones picked up the exchange, but it was clear he wasn't whispering calm reassurances. His gestures, short, clipped, intense, betrayed a level of agitation that did not go unnoticed. Courtroom insiders described a distinct shift after that moment. It wasn't just about what was said, it was about what was felt. Every movement seemed amplified, every sigh weighed heavily. The prosecution didn't need to say a word. Diddy's visible discomfort was speaking for itself. Then came the gut punch, the emotional core of Cassie's testimony. She spoke about the psychological toll of being stuck in a relationship where resistance felt dangerous. Her words painted a chilling picture of what it means to be trapped in plain sight, caught in a cycle of fear disguised as affection. And at that point, the controlled image Diddy had tried so hard to maintain fractured completely. According to several observers, he clenched his fists, leaned forward, and exchanged what appeared to be tense, heated words with his legal counsel. The whispers might have been hushed, but the courtroom's reaction wasn't. A heavy silence settled across the space. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the room itself held its breath. The temperature had changed. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a public reckoning playing out in front of a dozen jurors and a nation watching closely. Question began to circulate not only in legal circles but across social platforms and media outlets. Was this trial going to be decided solely on evidence and testimony, or were Diddy's emotional responses becoming part of the prosecution's unspoken case? While Cassie's words painted a vivid picture of abuse and control, Diddy's visible reactions risked reinforcing it in a way even the most compelling evidence couldn't do alone. As proceedings continued, it became clear that every sigh, every clenched jaw, every whisper between Diddy and his lawyers was being scrutinized. His silence wasn't stoic. It was brimming with tension. And for many observers, that raised a new layer of concern. Maybe they weren't just hearing about manipulation and control. They were watching the echoes of it play out right there in court.
That if there was a time when you were getting beat up in a room and couldn't walk out, you would reimagine it in a way that you were actually able to leave the room. Do you see this potentially backfiring on the defense?
Oh, Brianna, you took the words right out of my mouth. Yes, you're exactly right. The defense needs to be really careful what they're doing here because she is a victim. She is a victim. She has put herself out there and saying that she survived these horrific instances of rape, of other assaultive behaviors, some of which we've set right back up there and say, well, the only reason she needed to go to therapy and seek EMDR and the other types of therapy was because of the actions of your client, Combs' attorney team. So they're going to go right back at it and say that had she not been so brutally traumatized, she wouldn't have had to seek therapy, and that's a good thing. And certainly anybody on that jury who's ever been to therapy or knows anything about it, they're going to be thinking about how Cassie Ventura could be being traumatized right now, again, in having to relive all of the various questioning for days from both sides. So you're right, Brianna. This is a slippery slope that the defense team is on right now.
Cassie's lawsuit against Diddy isn't just another celebrity scandal making headlines. It's a flashpoint in a larger transformation shaking the foundations of Hollywood. For generations, the entertainment industry has enabled its most influential players to act without consequence, cloaked in stardom and protected by power. But those protections are beginning to crack. This case isn't simply about a toxic relationship. It's a window into the long-standing machinery of silence, control, and unchecked influence that has propped up the entertainment elite for decades. In another era, Cassie's allegations, claims involving coercion, emotional manipulation, and institutional abuse, might have been dismissed outright. Brushed off as gossip, buried by powerful PR machines. But in today's climate, shaped by the seismic impact of the now Me Too movement, there's a shift in who gets believed and who gets held accountable. What Cassie is doing isn't happening in a vacuum. She's stepping into a growing movement of survivors who are refusing to stay quiet, forcing society to reckon with the shadows behind the spotlight. Consider the precedent. When the Harvey Weinstein case broke open, it didn't just take down one man, it broke a dam. The flood of stories that followed gave space for others to come forward. Russell Simmons, Kevin Spacey, R. Kelly. Decades of whispered stories, ignored warnings, and silenced victims finally reached the surface. Each case has chipped away at the illusion that fame equals invincibility. Now, Cassie's lawsuit is following a similar path, pushing the industry to confront one of its biggest names, Sean Diddy Combs, and asking, what happens when the illusion of untouchable power begins to crumble? Public response has been fierce, but also divided. Many have rallied behind Cassie, praising her courage and calling her a symbol of resistance in an industry still fraught with imbalance. Social media has exploded with support, spreading her story and calling for justice. But beneath that wave of solidarity lies a countercurrent of doubt. Some fans have questioned her timing, asking why she waited years to come forward. Others, echoing the defense's arguments, have used Cassie's past messages to Diddy, texts that showed friendliness or affection, as evidence to downplay her claims. But this skepticism only underscores a deeper problem, the misunderstanding of abuse, especially when it involves high-profile figures. Victims often maintain contact with abusers, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of a complicated emotional history that doesn't fit neatly into the public's expectations. Industry insiders understand this all too well. As one veteran observer noted, in Hollywood, image is power, and power creates silence. The more someone controls their public narrative, the harder it becomes for the people around them to speak the truth. That's what makes Cassie's decision so significant. She's not just calling out a former partner, she's challenging an empire. Diddy is more than a musician. He's a mogul, a brand, a cultural architect. Taking him on is not just a legal battle, it's a career-defining risk. The cost of speaking up isn't just emotional, it can be professional exile. For Diddy, this trial could be a watershed moment. He's long been seen as a symbol of success, of resilience, of hip-hop royalty. But if Cassie's claims are upheld, It won't just stain his legacy. It could dismantle the carefully built mythology around him. This isn't just about court rulings or financial consequences. It's about whether the entertainment industry will continue to protect its icons at all costs, or finally start holding them to the same standards as everyone else. Cassie's case is a test, not just for Diddy, but for Hollywood itself. Can an industry rooted in power and illusion become a space where truth and accountability are prioritized over reputation and wealth? The outcome of this case might help answer that question. Regardless of the verdict, it's already reshaping how we understand power, victimhood, and what it truly means to speak out in a system designed to keep you silent. Whether or not a gavel slams in favor of Cassie, the verdict is already murmuring across the culture. This trial, intimate and explosive, has become more than a battle between a pop star and a music mogul. It has peeled back the velvet curtain and shown the bones of an industry long drunk on its own power. Even as legal arguments play out within the tight walls of the courtroom, the court of public opinion has expanded into a coliseum, and its spectators aren't just watching, they're demanding change. The central truth in all of this is bigger than Diddy. Cassie's lawsuit, the testimony, the chilling footage, the emotional unraveling, the performative defenses, all of it serves as an emblem of a systemic rot that Hollywood can no longer ignore.